All right.
Try it now.
Okay.
There you go.
Oh, good. All right. So in Czechoslovakia in 1919, a man named Aaron had a pregnant wife and no visible means of support. So he worked in his mother's business, but he brought home meager wages, and his mother's business just could not support two families. So he thought, what could I do to find a good business opportunity? And World War I had just ended, and so the leather goods industry had been really hard hit. So people had difficulty finding shoes. And so he decided, all right, I'm going to start a shoe business. So he borrowed lots of money from family, friends, and acquaintances. He traveled to a large city, found a shoe broker, and bought 500 pairs of sturdy military shoes. So he was elated, and he traveled home, opened the box, only to find he didn't have 500 pairs of military shoes. He had 1,000 pairs of right foot only shoes. Immediately he went back to the city to find that shoe broker who had disappeared. So he was devastated, and his wife told him, you should go visit this holy man. He's full of wisdom. Aaron didn't know what to do, so he went and visited the holy man, who told him to go to church, recite the Psalms, and God would help him. For days on end, Aaron visited the church. He recited the Psalms, he prayed, he wept, but all he could think about was those 1,000 right foot only shoes and all that money he had borrowed from so many people. One day, another man entered the church, and he seemed really upset. He prayed, recited the Psalms, and wept, just like Aaron had been doing. So Aaron felt compassion for the man, and he asked, what's wrong? Well, it turned out this man had borrowed a lot of money and was cheated by a dishonest merchant who sold him what he thought were 500 pairs of military shoes. But when he opened the box, there were 1,000 shoes for the left foot. Stunned, Aaron told him what had happened to him. And they paired up their shoes. They were perfect matches. And they went on to become prosperous. How did they both end up in the same church after being cheated by dishonest merchants? They didn't know. They just knew that after they met, they perceived their problem differently. They let go of their anger toward the cheating merchants, and they recognized the opportunity that lay before them. As a result, their lives changed for the better. Sometimes what seem like horrible circumstances turn into something wonderful that changes our lives for the better. Aaron didn't know what to do, but he was willing to follow the advice of the holy man. He changed his perspective, and it turned his life around. Circumstances in our lives often aren't that dramatic, but we may find ourselves in unhappy situations that we perceive as hopeless, tragic, or sometimes just downright irritating. So, how do we change our point of view? How do we train our minds to see things differently? That's what the book, A Course in Miracles, is all about. It's a course in mind training. It helps us perceive ourselves and our world in a different light. When we look through our own eyes, we often see weakness, fear, and evidence of being separated from God. All those perceptions are mistaken. In A Course in Miracles, we're taught to see through Christ's vision, through Christ consciousness, through that sense of universal oneness. The book says the opposite of seeing through the body's eyes is the vision of Christ, which reflects strength rather than weakness, unity rather than separation, and love rather than fear. The section of A Course in Miracles called A Workbook for Students is full of lessons that help us learn to change our perceptions so that we can see the amazing truth of who we really are. Then we can see from a more positive perspective. In lesson 121, the goal is to recognize that forgiveness is the key to happiness. There are several steps the lesson recommends in order to practice forgiveness. When I was studying that lesson, I went through the steps one night. It was hard because there was someone I needed to forgive. Someone who had done something harmful for me, no one any of you know. The lesson told me to think of that person. I was to close my eyes and see her in my mind. I was to look at her for a while and try to find somewhere within her some evidence of light. Once I saw that light, I was to try and let that light extend until it covered her and made her look beautiful and good. That was not easy. I still had some angry thoughts toward that person. I could barely see a thin light around her. It was the best I could do. Then, just to complicate things, I was to turn my mind to a friend and try to transfer the light I saw around the person who had harmed me and to see it surround my friend. Then I was to imagine that my friend offered that light to me. As I did so, I was to let the person I was upset with and my friend unite and bless me with that light. The purpose of it was to help us see that we're all one. Talk about a challenge. I was willing to do this lesson, but it was so hard. I didn't think I did it very well at all. The light around the person who had tried to harm me was so thin, it was almost too small to work with. The next morning, I repeated the lesson. When I came to the part about seeing a light around the person who had hurt me, I was astonished. There was so much light. It was thick and golden and bright and beautiful. It made the rest of the lesson easy to complete. I could see the person who had upset me in a totally different way. It was easier to forgive her and let the situation go. How had that happened? What had changed from the night before to the next morning? We're told in A Course in Miracles that when we do everything we can, God takes the final step, the one we cannot take for ourselves. Our willingness makes that possible. I could hardly see any light around that person the night before, but I was willing to try. God took that willingness, and in the final step I couldn't take, helped me to perceive her differently. She's a perfect child of God, and so am I, in spite of my former anger toward her. We often don't realize how much help we have around us. Life can seem so difficult. No matter how hard we try, things don't work out the way we want them to. It just seems like we're stuck. We perceive difficulties and aggravations and wonder why we can't make things flow better in our lives. If we had any inkling of the many spirit guides, angels, and other divine helpers who are around us, just waiting for us to ask for help, we would be more than amazed. I was reminded of how loving and tender they are during an article writing assignment I had last month. To give you a little background, some time ago, I went through a year and a half of shamanic training during some weekends in the Albuquerque area. And one of the techniques we learned was how to remove negative energies and entities from people with divine help. As I looked at the list of angels, archangels, ascended masters, and other spirit guides that we could call on for help, I noticed a section of names that included some Native Americans, but nowhere among those names were any Navajos. One name kept coming to me. It felt like the person was knocking on the door of my mind saying, "Pick me, pick me." It was Annie Wanika. Annie sat on the Navajo Nation Council and helped her people improve health and education in their lives. She died in 1997, so I added her name to the list of spirit guides that I could call on for help. When I was just out of college in the late 1960s, my first job was as the head of a Bureau of Indian Affairs dormitory of kindergarten through third grade students at Toye Boarding School. It's about 30 miles west of Ganado, Arizona. And one day, Annie Wanika visited our dorm. She came in with this long, beautiful, billowing skirt, long-sleeved velvet blouse, and she wore this beautiful, beautiful silver and turquoise necklace. And she was a big woman, very powerful looking. And I thought, I don't want to get on her bad side. But there was a loving compassion about her too. I could tell she cared deeply for her people. Sometime after my shamanic training was complete, I was working with someone, with a client, using the technique to remove negative energies and entities. When I asked what spirit guide wanted to assist in the process, Annie Juanica showed up. She was very helpful. After the session was over, she stayed with me for several days. And when I went into large stores like Walmart in Farmington, in my mind I could see her right beside me with her long skirt and velvet blouse. And whenever she saw Navajos coming in and out of the store, she said, "Precious, precious, precious." That's how she saw her Navajo people. They were so precious to her. And I heard her say this so many times when she was with me, that even now, after all this time, when I walk into a store and I see Navajo people, I hear her words, "Precious, precious." Last month, when I had the opportunity to interview a Navajo lady named Shauna Vicente, the new head of Navajo Preparatory School in Farmington, I prayed about the interview in advance, and I asked Annie Juanica to come with me. I'm really not sure why I did, but I thought, well, maybe she'll give me a better understanding of the situation. So I walked into Shauna's office for the interview, and we sat at a long conference table. Shauna was at the head of the table, and I sat on one side. And in my mind, so clearly, I could see Annie Juanica sitting on the other side of the table from me. So as the interview started, she just listened. Then Shauna began talking about the years that she had been a student at Navajo Prep. The former head of school, Betty O.J., who had been there 27 years and was an amazing leader who guided that school through many transitional changes, was also very, very involved in the lives of the students. She was able to mentor Shauna, and during Shauna's junior and senior years at Navajo Prep, that made such a wonderful difference in Shauna's life. And as Shauna talked about being mentored, Annie reached out one hand and gently touched her cheek in such a loving, compassionate gesture that I had a hard time keeping from being emotional. It was such a tender, motherly, caring touch. Later in the interview, Shauna talked about wanting to be a mentor to the students at Navajo Prep, just like Betty had been a mentor to her. And when Shauna said that, Annie got up out of her seat, walked around behind Shauna, and placed her hands on Shauna's head in blessing. I was overwhelmed. I think I kept my composure, but inside I felt like melted butter in the light of Annie's caring compassion and support for Shauna. I was able to share that experience with Shauna later after I sent her the article so she could check it for accuracy. I really wasn't sure if I should share with her what had happened during the interview, but it seemed like the right thing to do. Shauna listened quietly and respectfully, and when I was done, she said with great sincerity, "Tell Annie thank you." Now Annie will be Shauna's spirit guide to help her through the challenging times that she faces in her new job. All she has to do is ask. You all have spirit guides and angels and other divine helpers around you, ready to assist you if you ask. They will help you see through Christ's vision, through that sense of universal oneness. They will help you change your perspective about whatever challenges you face. Maybe you think you'll never overcome certain habits or ways of being that seem to trip you up. Ask for help in changing your perspective. If you're faced with 1,000 right foot only shoes, you may think all is lost. But God has a way of arranging solutions we never dreamed possible. All we have to do is remember that we're not the hostage of fear, of failure, or of never getting out of the rut we're in. There's help out there that we often never imagine. If you don't know who any of your angels or spirit guides are, that's okay. Ask God for help. He will arrange solutions that may amaze you. In Matthew 7:7, Jesus said, "Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you." Maybe you've tried that and it didn't seem to help. Don't give up. Keep asking for assistance. Keep asking God to help you see from a different perspective. You may be surprised how differently you view the world when you see through Christ's vision, through that sense of how we're all one. You have more help than you realize. Remember to ask for that help and never, never give up.